We're here with Mark Surman, the president of Mozilla. Mozilla is one of the most important organizations in the world, has supported the open web, and been that third player on the web that supports open source, that supports communities and community participation in building the open web, and has done that for years now. Mark is here for the India AI Summit, and we were on a panel together, and I thought we should discuss what's happening to the web, what's happening to Mozilla, and where do we go from the AI Summit. Mark, welcome to MediaNama, and thank you for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me. I love to pick up some of the things we talked about the other day.
Uh, let's start with an easy one. Is there a future for the open web in an agent-first world?
I think absolutely there's a future for the open web, but we actually have to figure out what does that mean and how to shape that future.
Okay.
The web the web has gone through, a lot of different evolutions, right? I mean, we could have been in fact, we were the beginning of the smartphone revolution saying, will apps destroy the open web? Well, have they? No. I mean, we certainly spend a lot of time in apps, but we also have found other ways to reach each other. We find the web in relationship to apps, often content from the web we experience through apps, often monetization comes through apps, but this web of content and relationships that is, I think, at the heart of what we mean by the open web, still has continued to grow and grow. So I think it will transform in AI. It could be destroyed, but now the question is, like, how do we keep what we mean and what we like about the open web alive? And that's very much on my mind.
So one of the things that I'm hearing from publishers across the world, and now from in fact even classifieds business, is that traffic is dropping sharply. So unlike the app ecosystem where you had your own app and you still retain value, the shift that's taking place now is that because of AI and the ability to substitute the content on the web, it's now the traffic is dropping, and if those business models collapse, then the ability for people to create content services that are independent kind of dies. So I mean, going back to that same question again, that what does the web become then? Because it sounds like it's becoming a source of content for AI rather than AI becoming a source of traffic for the web.
So I think we need to separate out what do we want the web to be, or what is the essence of what we wanted the web to be, and the mechanics of how the web has been in its different eras. So what did we want the web to be? It's like connection of all humanity, the ability to access all knowledge, the ability for that knowledge to be created democratically, the ability for us to find truth in that democratic creation of knowledge. And so I think there's a chance for all of that not only to continue to flourish in a world of AI, but to get better. But what do we have to do now if we want that to be true is we need to reinvent how content is created. What do we mean by content? What does it mean to democratically influence it? And most importantly, what are the business models? And if I go back to the beginning of the era of the open web, we were asking the same question. What are the business models? We're all putting up websites. Okay, now we have pop-up ads. Oh, now there's search engines with advertising. Oh, now there's apps and we can monetize. In that, we continue to have the democratic creation of knowledge. We continue to actually know each other more. We continue to struggle over what truth is, but actually find our way in that. So I think it's to always go back to those principles and then say, what are the new business models? What are the new delivery mechanisms? What are the ways in which many of us can shape what the story is? And I think we're just at a moment, and I say this on all of these fronts, that it's very like the mid to late 90s was for the web.
Wow.
Like we absolutely had a lot of hype, and people, oh, the internet's hype. Well, the internet mattered. The web mattered. But we didn't actually know what it was for. We didn't know how we were going to make money from it. We didn't know who would get to share in the benefits. And those should be the questions, as opposed to fearing that we lose the mechanics of how we did it before. How do we keep the essence of how we did it before and reinvent ourselves for the mechanics that this new fabric of technology creates?
So I spoke with Matthew Prince, the co-founder of Cloudflare, a few days ago, and he said that about 35% of the web's traffic currently is bots. So one, assuming that maybe in the next year and a half, that might be more than 50%,
It could
uh,
go up to 99. Who
could go up to
knows?
99. So how do you think the architecture of the web needs to change? Do we need to have like a separate agentic web? Do we need a new DNS for the web? For agents, but in uh, to basically navigate. Technically, how should the web change? Um, and in that sense, in an agent first world, what technical properties have to exist for the web to remain open?
I think the question of what technical properties need to exist is one that we're going to be working through for a few years now.
Okay.
If I start with like some of the things that I think are most important now, one of them is what our CTO Rafi Krikorian talks about is portable private memory. And so this idea that right now, I take my context or my memory or my questions or my knowledge and I build it up in, let's say, ChatGPT. It gets better at understanding me. We start to have, in many ways, a kind of a interdependent relationship where it becomes more helpful to me and it becomes more adapted to me. But if I decide to move to Gemini or Mistral or,
I gotta start over.
yeah, I got to start over. And so, just purely from a consumer perspective or a human perspective, that's a pain in the ass. And from a competition perspective and a kind of value control perspective, it's kind of unfair, right? I should be able to switch. I should be able to still be me across multiple models and multiple products. And so, one thing that I think we need a standard architecture for is me. How do I control and own my memory? And then, how do I build in sets of security and permissions layers that allow me to control the relationships with what other agents can do in relationship to my me-ness, and the permissions of how my agentic framework interacts with the rest of the agents in the world. And so maybe that sounds like science fiction. I would say people have been talking about this for 20 years. It sounded like science fiction 20 years ago. But in a world of OpenClaw or Claude Code work or all of these things, I think it's increasingly clear we need this version of ourselves to be based in technical standards and in product. And then it needs to have a set of negotiation properties, actually, as much as security properties. And so what that means then as a person who is a source of content, a consumer of content, maybe also if I imagine that portable private memory as something that can instantiate an entity, a publisher, a company, that we have ways to be negotiating value exchange and negotiating rights as we move through the system. So I think that may sound very abstract, but there are people working on it. There's companies working on it. We're working on it. And I think that will be a key piece of the fabric of what I think of as certainly many of the properties of what we value in the web being protected.
Again, if we go beyond 50%, do we need a separate architecture of the web for agents?
I don't think we know yet. I think this is one component of an architecture we need. Does that still sit on top of TCP/IP? Does it still sit on top of DNS? I mean, those have been very resilient layers to build on. So, is the underlying layers of the stack would need to change? I don't think we'll know the answers to that. What I would say, I don't think we'll know the answers to that for many years. What I think we need to remember is the internet is this set of layers that has kind of evolved over time, and one of its great properties is that technologies from one era have been able to function as a substrate of the technologies of the next. So I believe we should move forward with that assumption for now, and then there may be places where we need to do massive renovation lower in the kind of stack. But for now, like let's just assume we can get this done with TCP/IP, with DNS, and that we need to figure out things higher in the stack, things like my portable private memory. And maybe we can have to come back and renovate some of those later, like we have with IPv6. But that is something that has to necessarily happen a little bit more slowly or kind of incrementally, given how much we've come to rely on it. This runs our whole world right now, the internet.
So, the way I see it was, especially with the advent of social media and apps, thankfully deep linking was there and the browser still remained a mechanism for browsing the open web. As agents become, or AI chatbots become the default UI, um, what becomes of the browser? Uh, is there decline in the usage of browsers with increase in usage of chatbots? Apart from the fact that you can also open some of these services within chat, but does the browser have a future? When agents can browse the web for you, bring back information, and share it with you?
It's a good question. Does the browser have a future? And I think at least the near term answer is quite clear. OpenAI, Perplexity, others are building browsers. We're actually having many people say we're in the new browser wars. So I would say the browser is actually back on the table as a really important category for how we shape what our interaction is with the digital world. So the real question I would put forward to you or to people who are thinking about this, what do we want a browser to be? And that will be, I think, I think there's two interesting points of contestation. One is, what do we want the browser to be? And we can talk about that. And then the other is like, who's going to control and who's going to win this third browser war, if we think of it that way.
Well, there are essentially three browser engines in the world. You have one of them.
Yep.
Uh, in that sense, do you think the browser engines need to evolve? Do we need is there a room for a fourth construct right now?
Well, I think most people don't know what a browser engine is. And so just to say that browser engine is the thing that sits underneath a browser that makes it be able to interact with the web. And we have one at Mozilla, and Chromium is the most dominant one made by Google, and Apple has their own. I think there's both opportunities for others and there's a need for them to evolve. And I think you're already seeing that with Chromium, and I think we're thinking about it with Gecko, our engine. And that means exactly engaging with the technical question, what will the web become and what do we want it to become? And so looking at how does Gecko evolve to hold as many of the properties of the web as we can, but also build in the ability for us to have control as we're increasingly, the browser becomes our agent. And maybe that's the important concept to put out there. As the browser becomes our agent or our central agent in which we interact with others. And so I don't know that anybody has the map of what do the browser engines need to change versus what does the product need to change. But if you think about it that way, which is if the browser becomes a container for me or becomes my agent in the world, we always called the browser the user agent in a technical way.
Yeah.
And there's literally thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of automated systems, other agents coming at me. Its function is to be my trusted negotiator, its representation of myself. What more important product category could there be than that?
So here's one way I look at it. What agents are doing right now is almost forcing interoperability which had been otherwise walled or closed. And so you prefer surfaces where your agents can actually interact and you can engage with it. So the browser can actually become independent of the user interface that we currently have.
Yeah.
And become an agent that you can operate across a Telegram, across a
Sure.
browser. So the browser in its current construct just remains one of the interfaces that the engine can call for you.
And I think that's absolutely the key piece is, right? The browser is a new category. I think who's going to win is a question.
Yeah.
And then what do we mean by a browser is the other question. And I don't think that the form factor is what matters. I think the fact that it represents you, that it's your place of safety, it's your place of memory, right? If you think about like one of the things that a Firefox is good at is, and it's the place where the history of everything that you've seen digitally exists, and you can keep it privately. Like imagine extending that out into all of your digital interactions. Like that property is what matters in the browser or your personal agent as a construct. Whether or not you type in a URL bar or get search results as opposed to some chatbot result, that's not what matters. That's the evolution. That's the evolution of what a browser will be. And so, how do we engage with that concretely? Because we have to dive into these questions as product or as technology, right?
So almost a browser as a second brain, so to speak.
Or as an agent who represents me. right? Which it always has been in many ways, but now it really matters. And I think one of the things that you're saying, agents are kind of in some ways forcing interoperability,
And I think that's one of the great things that's happening with
so I think
agents.
that's a great thing that's happening. But what they're risking, and I
Yeah.
think we also need to balance, is trust
Yeah.
and control and security. And so that's, I think, where if I think about what is a browser 5 years from now, it's the thing that lets me interoperate with the digital world, other people, but also all the digital manifestations of those people and entities, and also allows me to have and negotiate trust, have and negotiate security. And like we need to have those things to continue to be humans in this like hyperscaled digital environment.
And that actually makes Mozilla even more important because as an organization, those values have defined Mozilla for many decades, and many of us still uh, prefer Mozilla for that very reason. Right?
Well, I hope we're up to the kind of I hope we're up to the challenge.
The
That
expectations that we have of you.
because and I do too
Yeah.
in leading Mozilla, which is you need to bring those values. So values like openness, values like privacy, although I think what that means is got to evolve. Values like user control, values like security, like we have to figure out what those mean now in a radically different digital world. And so, we're committed to that. We've reorganized the whole organization to tackle that challenge. And it's a tricky game that we can only play with others. And so, I think now we just have to dig in and build things and hold to our values. And our commitment is that to do that. But it's not, a straightforward path.
Well, you've had one scare in the last few years, which is the antitrust case against Google. And I'm saying, while this is important, the fact that um, search is collapsing into invocation, so to speak, is uh, if search collapses or reduces, or if it shifts to the other answer engines, Mozilla's finances are still largely tied into Google search, right? So, if the browser's role changes, if people use the browsers less, then what will Mozilla do?
It's very clear to us that the real economic risk for Mozilla wasn't, or at least wasn't primarily the antitrust case. It's that search changes, and that so much of our revenue, until recently, about 98% of it came from search, not just from Google, but also Bing and DuckDuckGo, and you can make those choices in Firefox. And so, for a number of years, I mean, this has been a big part of my agenda in terms of how we're changing Mozilla. Our goal is diversify our revenue, and not just diversify our revenue in terms of who are our kind of business partners or where does our revenue come from, but even the types of revenue. And so one of the things that has happened is you've seen Firefox has moved into this, not a very AI centric piece, it's just a very basic thing in diversifying our revenue. Advertising that is not based on search, advertising that actually is the best in the class in the industry on privacy, where you see advertising directly in Firefox. And so we think advertising is still going to fund a part of how the internet goes forward, but you want to do that in a user respecting way, and you don't want to just tie it to search. And so that's now become 10-12% of our revenue. So we're probably now down to about 85% coming from search. So that's a first step. But as we move into, we've been setting up new companies and new investment mechanisms, other areas. We've built an open source AI developer tools company. Hopefully that becomes a source of enterprise revenue. Or we are building a two-sided data marketplace for ethical training data. Hopefully that becomes a way to actually shift the data marketplace, but also a source of revenue. So we are very actively looking for both other ways that we can influence the direction of the web and AI, and other ways to make money. And I think the two things go together, right? I mean, you have to actually be in the market as well as sit there as a nonprofit in order to influence the direction of this stuff. We've always been about both things, and that ties both to our mission and to how our money works.
So you've also, you've now got Mozilla VPN. You've also tried multiple. You've launched products, but sunset them eventually. You've bought products like Pocket and then sunset
Yeah.
them. I'm just curious about How do you think about products within Mozilla, and why is it that great products like Lockwise and Pocket no longer exist?
So, the thing I would point out, one of the things that I would say we have a much different focus on now in terms of products is focus. And that doesn't mean only doing one thing, but it means having different leaders to do different things. I think we've tried to shove too many things under one leader and kind of maybe we're doing a million things plus Firefox, but then we're just doing Firefox. And if I'm honest, like that part of like the product focus has been difficult to kind of get the right setup and the right leadership for. But what we have now is, the core Firefox organization, that's one company in our portfolio. It has a new CEO who's amazing, Anthony DeMeo, and he's really looking at how do we evolve Firefox, diversify revenue and offerings inside of the Firefox brand. And so VPN will be coming under Firefox and it'll be integrated into it. As we figure out new AI features, it'll be a part of AI mode in Firefox. So I think a really strong, technologically savvy CEO leading the Firefox product group, really focused on how does Firefox evolve and change with AI. That is a thing we've never really locked before, and I think we have now. But then in the Thunderbird group, there's their own, it's its own company. It has its own CEO. They're looking at how do we evolve private email and what's beyond email. In the AI developer tool space, which we always had developer tooling sort of tied to Firefox, we're building a separate company there. So I think one of the things that's just radically different in our structure is dedicated product companies in different product categories with their own leaders, their own business plans, their own P&Ls. And so, who knows if we'll succeed, but we have a very different approach than we have had in the last 15 years.
What's the thought process around the investment vehicle? Are you investing for exits? Are you investing for something that can grow Mozilla's own products, or like what's the idea behind it? Or can you take something to an IPO?
Yeah. So when you say the investment vehicle, you mean the ones I just mentioned or our venture fund?
I'm talking about the venture fund.
Yeah. So the theory on the venture fund is really very simple. Is we want to see, the theory behind the Mozilla Ventures Fund is very simple. We want to see more Firefox-like things in the world. So products based on our values that influence the market because they're popular, and the side effect is they make money. And so that's what a Firefox is to us. And we've tried to make more Firefoxes, and maybe we will. I think we're going to just make the one Firefox we have better and evolve it in the AI world. And we're trying to set up some of our own companies to create more Firefox-like things. But the odds of us having a second hit record, those are low odds. But we want a lot more people to have that kind of hit record. And so Mozilla Ventures is just about backing founders who are building Firefox-like proper. The idea behind Mozilla Ventures is really that we're backing founders who might create these Firefox-like things that are responsible tech products that have our values, that are commercial. And so in that, we have people who are doing developer-oriented products that are like radically different approaches to AI architecture. So there's a federated learning company called Flower that I love that could really change the whole architecture of AI. Or we have AI governance companies that are in there that if and when things start going wrong with AI, these are going to be really important companies. Like, there's one called Credo AI, which is kind of a leader in AI governance. And we're also starting to see, consumer tech companies who have a different view of social media or a different view of how do we all work together on the web.
Let's talk about open source. What is open source AI and what is not open source AI?
What is open source AI is a hotly debated question. Although in many ways also not many people are in that hot debate. And so to kind of bring it into the nerdiness of people who do talk about this, open source at its core is about four things. It's that I can use it freely, it's that I can study it or that it's transparent, I can look inside of how it works, I can modify it, I can change it for myself, I can build something new from it, and then I can redistribute that. I could sell it or I can give it away to somebody else. Like that's the essence of what open source is, and that's how Firefox and Linux and so many things have grown, right? Because I can do those things, so many people use it. So many people build on it and make it better. So many people spread it again and it takes over the whole world. So ultimately, open source AI is the things that have those properties. And ultimately, I think they can take over the whole world. I think open source can be the winning paradigm if we get it right in AI. And so, many of those properties are in the open source, or the things that get called open source but are really open weight models, whether that is, something like Llama or something like Quen, something like Mistral. And then more importantly, or I think just the thing that people miss, is many of those things, or many of the things that matter in the rest of the open source AI stack, the things we use to train models, the things we use to pull data, the things we use to orchestrate, are open source software in the traditional sense. So what I would say is there's a lot of open source activity in AI, to the point where I could build, in fact we have built, many people have built their own ChatGPT-like things in mostly open source ways. And so 3 years ago, you couldn't have imagined that. Now there's thousands of them. The one limitation, or the one thing that really is a sticking point, is most of the things that get called open source models, like a Llama or a Quen, the underlying training process, what the data is, how it was trained, the pre-training, is opaque. And that is not open source in any traditional sense, in that I can't really look inside of that part. And so, those things, I think they're still incredibly valuable. We use them, we build on them. They're better than something that's just locked behind an API that I can't modify on top of. But I think there is a real question, is can we get to the point of highly performant, what people often call truly open models, where I see what is the training data? What were the pre-training checkpoints? Can I modify them and fork them at that level? And I think in the current architecture of LLMs as like one type of AI, that is like a harder thing, because there's so much money that goes into that process. And what you're seeing more is open source in relation to models being open source in relation to models being the ability to take it freely and then modify it dramatically, and then to be able to choose between and orchestrate multiple models. So if you just take a case, if I pull together, something on top of Llama or Quen, and then I, do fine tuning or transform it in some way, or combine it with other models and create my own new small model and put it under a very good open source license, some kind of Apache or MIT license, is that thing open source or not? Not totally, truly, because the thing underneath is opaque. But I've changed it so much and made it something new, and taken these different pieces of raw material, I can say how I did that. Maybe it is. And so I think in that part of the creation and transformation of models, it's almost like the materiality of that part of the stack, I think we have to wrestle with what do we mean by open source. And I think, frankly, my instinct is it's going in the right direction, but that we're still babies in this and we don't quite know what we mean.
So one fear that I've seen from the open source community in India that works on AI is around licensing, saying if they truly build a completely open AI model, then all of that information, the weights, the data will just be taken by the proprietary large language model. So they're struggling with figuring out how to create a license for this.
That doesn't seem like a licensing question as much as a do you believe in open source or not question.
I think they don't want to, they want to be useful, but they don't want to empower the proprietary systems at the same time.
But open source has always done that. I mean, the way that open source works is anybody can use it, anybody can modify it, anybody can share it, right? And so, that becomes the question of how do you balance having a commons versus corporate benefit, or and even arguments about corporate capture. So you can have a debate, but I don't think it's any different in AI of is it a good thing or a bad thing that the whole tech industry and most governments run on the Linux ecosystem, run on the Linux stack, right? I think that that's good. We have a common infrastructure for humanity that individuals, companies, and governments all contribute to in different pieces of, in different ways. It's highly leveraged when you think about the overall open source ecosystem. The chief scientist, or sorry, the chief economist of the Linux Foundation has shown, Frank Nagel, that there's only about $4 billion to create most of the open source stack that we have now, and about $8 trillion in value that is unlocked from that. So you have this highly leveraged commons, and yes, of course, companies benefit from it. They also are the biggest contributors back to it. And if that is how the AI kind of infrastructure of the world works, that it's a commons that yes, companies use, but I can use too, and that they contribute to it as well, like that's kind of that's a better version of the economics of a thing than we have in most other parts of society. I'm happy to make that trade.
Just on openness, I'm just curious because we've seen a few things happen in the last many years. For example, the advent of F-Droid as an open source app store, the advent of Hugging Face as a source
Yeah.
for open source models. Has Mozilla considered either like integrating, working? I mean, is there an easy or a quick way that I can implement a small language model within the browser itself? Have you had those conversations? Have you thought of going down that path
Yep.
of becoming the open space where the open AI ecosystem sort of congregates and the app ecosystem congregates? Because not everyone knows about F-Droid, but the browser is a great way for discovery of that integration.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Is like, what's the role of the browser and what's the role of Mozilla? And I would separate those in, creating basically optionality and the way for there to be an open ecosystem of people pulling in different things, different agents, different models, different digital objects. And we've absolutely thought of that. I will say the first step in that is Mozilla AI, the separate company we spun out for developers. Its focus is on exactly that kind of choice. So it's putting out libraries like any LLM or any agent, which are basically developer tools oriented towards building dynamic choice into the architecture of what you do. So it means that I can test against 5 different models. I can build an actual production grade thing that dynamically switches between models based on different parameters, including cost. And if we start to build that as an architecture of choice and start to build that out as standards in how developers work, then you're going to start to have some of the substrate of what you're talking about, which is choice in how AI works in the underlying architecture. And we need that first, and we need that actually to emerge in the market amongst developers before really it can be practical. And so that's the first step we're doing, and we're trying to build a public benefit business around that in the developer space. How does that then show up for consumers, which the browser is the obvious vector for that? I think actually the email client might be another place for that. I think we're talking about it. The path is not yet quite clear. The values are clear. So as we build out AI mode in Firefox, which we haven't talked about yet, it being a place where I have agency to choose different services, combine things, I have choice, I can use different models, I can have my own controlled memory, all of those things are a part of what we're talking about there. Does it actually look like a Hugging Face or an F-Droid or connect you to those things? I think we're too soon to know exactly how those kinds of things would work out.
We've just finished, or we're on the last day of the AI summit in India. What were your takeaways from the summit? There's been some amount of criticism about the organizing of the summit, but what was your sense of the vibe of the conversations of what you've seen in Delhi?
I mean, I love Delhi. I've been here many times, and the summit actually and Delhi kind of fused in a really wonderful way, in that it feels like a really vibrant city where there's a lot of different collisions that happen.
AI was everywhere.
Yeah, AI was everywhere,
everywhere.
and it was a little chaotic,
Yeah.
but beautiful. And so I would say 2 things about the summit. One is, you had the right set of players here, or at least enough of the right types of players here in terms of real political power and leadership. real leadership in the tech industry of different kinds and competing kinds, not just the the big American players, although they were also here, and civil voices, civic and civil society voices, and startups, and a lot of the smaller players. And what a summit like this I judge on is not what's the announcement that comes out of it. It's like, what are the conversations and the deals and the kind of banging up against each other that happened. And I think the Delhi summit set the perfect context for that and brought together an amazing group of people. On specifics, what I would say is there was a conversation that was more exciting and real to me about there being, what people often talk about, a middle powers way or a third way on AI, and that open source really is an option. On substance, what I would say is there really was this conversation about open source and kind of tied to this middle powers idea, or that the tech industry needn't just be the US and China defining everything. Of course, they're leading players and really important players that everybody wants to work with, but that, countries that may think they're further behind or think they're too small, whether that's India or Canada, where I'm from, or anywhere else, think that we can shape part of the agenda and that we can capture a part of the value, and that open source is actually the key ingredient to that. And it's the key ingredient because people see it's capable enough now in AI to be useful. It's something that I can do one component and connect it to all the other components and capture value for myself and have influence for myself without having to build the whole thing. It's 80% done already, and so I get a head start. And I think in a way that I haven't seen before, that conversation, that potential of not just relying on America and China as the only drivers of the future, but as drivers of the future, but that we can all shape the future and all benefit economically and socially from the future. That spirit and concrete examples and plans on that at a business level, at a government level, those were really happening in all the conversations here, or at least the conversations I was in. And
There were many conversations.
yes, there were many conversations that I wasn't paying attention to or I wasn't in, which were not that.
Yeah.
But that was palpable, that open source can create a space for a different kind of AI and a different set of people to benefit, other than those who think they're in charge right now.
So one conversation that I felt was missing at the summit, and maybe I missed those conversations if they did happen, was the focus on on small language models. It almost seems as if large language models are a fait accompli, and that's all we will talk about, whether it is open sourced or not. Do you think that's a conversation we need to have more of, or do you think there's no role for that because large persistent memory linked to large language models is the way the world is shifting today?
What I would say is you were in the wrong conversations. So I was in many conversations about small language models. I mean, you saw the kind of a bunch of announcements and a keynote by Sarah Hooker, who is founder of this new startup called Adaption, which I should say we're an investor in. And it's very much about how do we have adaptive small language models as a new paradigm that is more, kind of targeted at our needs, more affordable, more efficient in terms of compute. And, I was then on other panels with, leading AI researchers who are saying 2026, this is going to be the year of small language models.
Okay.
So there was a lot of that in the right rooms. The people who are on the main stage don't benefit if this becomes the year of small language models. But it will be. And I think small languages models are kind of adjacent to open source because the open models are actually raw material for small language models. And so I think that open source small language models, orchestrating many models together, how that connects to agents, that is where things are going. I think the absolutely big monolithic centralized models, they will play a central role, but they will not be the deciding or defining part of the architecture of this going forward.
This from an India perspective, Mozilla is one of the most credible voices with the advocacy work that you've done for the open web. You had two great people in India, Amba Kak, who now heads the AI Now Institute, and Udbhav Tiwari, who you first moved to Berlin. Um, a few years ago, it almost felt like Mozilla's largely packed up from India, and I have heard from people in the community that they feel a bit abandoned in India, and India has contributed to Mozilla and has deep
Absolutely.
love for Mozilla. I'm just curious about what plans you may have for India. This is the largest internet market in the world in terms of users outside of China, and we hear. Um, I mean, big tech companies coming in and making announcements, but they come with their own agenda, and I'm just wondering about what Mozilla has in store for India.
Well, I would say it's fair. Not that we abandoned India, but I think as we went through some of our leadership changes, that we just didn't have, especially on the Firefox side, the engagement with community for a few years that we once had. And I think that's honestly a little bit of us finding ourselves. But I'll say two things. On the developer front, we really want to re-engage with India. Our CTO Rafi Krikorian is in Bangalore right now while we're here doing developer meetups with open source developers there, and like that's meant to be a first kind of handshake to say like we're back and we want to know what you want to do. I think we're particularly looking for people in India who are doing open source AI startups, open source AI projects. Like how can we help? So I would say that is anybody who fits that description who wants to work with us, like please reach out to me and Rafi. Like that is a big thing that we see potential for, we see action for in India. And then as Firefox adapts under its new leadership, India is like on the top of the list of places where we know we need to put more resources. India feels like a place that has always embraced Firefox. Firefox was always the thing that first had more Indian languages than the other browsers. And why did it have that? Because of the Indian Firefox community. I mean, they made those translations. And so you're going to see more engagement from Firefox in India. Just, because we are trying to rebuild the proposition of the browser, we think India is a place where people will be interested in what does it mean in this AI era to have a browser that gives you choice, that gives you control, that isn't just telling you this is the one way that AI can work, but lets you shape how AI is going to work. So I think both on the developer side and on the Firefox side, we're very interested in coming back and re-engaging, and hopefully people will want to engage and trust us. But we know there is a little bit of a sense that that we stepped out of the picture for a moment.
We're sort of in an online to offline movement here with almost online to AI. AI is changing the world, and I see. I've seen a lot of like I mostly was in founder conversations, and the parties where founders were congregating, and there is a lot of there was a lot of networking. I would get a sense of people wanting to work together or collaborate together. So we are going to see more stuff getting built out of here, more stuff happening here. And I would love for Mozilla to be the moral compass of how the web transitions to AI, if it indeed does do that.
Well, I think the thing I would say is India has a tremendous, and Indian startups and Indian open source developers, an opportunity to influence that question themselves of where does the web go, or how do those things we value about the web and the internet get embodied in and shape the direction of AI. And so I think of us more as somebody who can help and partner to guide a direction. But I think there's a real chance for Indian companies, Indian open source developers to actually have influence on what that is, influence in the world. And that's the conversation we want to have.
And look forward to having more of those conversations. Thank you for your time, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
look forward to seeing you in India very soon.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.
Thanks.